a sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. Hello, everyone. Time for another episode of Small Talk, or I meant interview. Like, I don't know what I'm saying today. I'm really pleased to have my guest back again. He's been on and we talked about his artistry, his producing, his career, a lot of great things. Today, we're going to explore something just a little bit different. Ladies and gentlemen, Russell Wallace. Welcome back, Russell.
Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. So I wanted to know what it was like for you growing up.
Well, I grew up in East Vancouver. My parents moved back to Canada in the late 60s. I was about 2.5, 3. And so East Vancouver was a different place back then. I grew up in the Mount Pleasant area, which is like Main and 18th. And it was a lot more working class back then, a lot more diversity for sure. Like, there was a lot of newcomers in the neighborhood and there was a lot of indigenous families as well. Like urban indigenous people, have been around for a long time. And usually we're kind of relegated to the poorer parts of town. So Mount Pleasant was kind of like that in some ways, because you could find a house to rent for really cheap. So a lot of families did that.
Okay. You said your parents moved back. Where were they prior to that?
Well, my parents moved to the United States in 1955. Okay. They originally were migrant workers in the farming communities, and back in the 50s, a lot of the farms were just starting to get established, and so they needed berry pickers and apple pickers and indigenous people were one of the first migrant workers there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting history, because that's when a lot of Mexican migrants were coming up from Texas at that time. And there was a large Filipino community as well. So like all these communities, mingled together.
Yes.
Even though we weren't allowed to, a lot of the farmers really dislike us coming together for some reason. I don't know what it is, but call it what it is, racism. They don't want to.
Yes.
They want control. But I mean, so a lot of my siblings grew up in the States and, got an education. And one of the reasons my dad moved down there is because in Canada, indigenous children weren't allowed to go beyond, grade 10, So in the States, you can get a grade 12 education if you're indigenous. So that was one of the primary reasons that, my parents chose to move down there.
Good for them. Yeah, good for them.
And so a lot of my siblings did get an education down there. And my parents moved back when my eldest sister started Langara, and she had some health issues. So they decided to move back to Canada to support her. But soon after she started college, she did pass away. So
right here.
So it was devastating for my parents, but my dad found a job right away working in I don't know what you call it. It's like they make those huge steel pipes. I don't know what they're called. There's a certain word for them. I should know this. That was my dad. But anyway, he got a job there and worked until he retired. So, that's how he could afford to buy a house in Vancouver back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And but also Vancouver was very racist as well, because there was a lot of neighborhoods where people of color weren't allowed to buy a house. And my parents experienced that. Like a real estate agent said, "Oh, you can't buy in that neighborhood," or different things. And
Right.
So there's a lot of laws in Vancouver that were prohibiting people of color from owning houses in certain parts of the area, and but yeah, so Main Street was not one of them because that's where a lot of people of color lived.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so I grew up there, and yeah, I was the youngest of 11, so I inherited all my elder siblings' records as they moved out and things. So
Mhm. It's interesting, when you're talking about the prejudices. Today, I was watching The View, and they were talking about those five Black policemen beating another Black young man to death, and I was just thinking about prejudice and bias and bigotry, and it's like, for me personally, it's so hard to get my mind around it, like why anybody thinks that the color of their skin makes them better or
mhm.
superior. It's really tough one. I don't get that at all.
Yeah, I know my parents experienced a lot of it, and my siblings and myself. But
Yeah.
one of the things that my dad would always say, when we, came home and said, "Oh, we experienced racism at this place," he would always say, like, "Well, you know who you are,
Mm,
and they know who you are, but they don't know who they are."
right.
So, and it always hit home. It was like, yeah,
Good point.
there's a lack of history in those genes or whatever, and that's why they attack people who have history.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's just crazy. Um, I don't want to talk about it too much because it makes me depressed. What it's like, because I can't. I wish I could fix it, obviously, but
Mm,
I
yeah.
can't. I can only do what I can do as one person. But let's talk about, like, you going to school now. You're 3, but now you're a little bit older. You're time to go to school, and was it an all, like, mostly white where the school was?
No, I went to Simon Fraser Elementary for my elementary school years, and I stayed there from kindergarten to grade 7. And again, like I said, it was a very diverse neighborhood. So there was a lot of in those days there was a lot of newcomers from Kenya, um, and Vietnam was another one back in the 70s. Um, but yeah, there was a large South Asian community in the neighborhood. There was a large, Chinese population in the neighborhood.
Mhm.
Um, and like I said, there was indigenous families that most of them we knew. It's like we'd
Yes.
see them. I was like, oh, where you're from, Um, but yeah, it was a lot more diverse in those days. And when I went to Tupper for grade 8, which was the first high school I went to, it was diverse, but that's where I seen uh, the separation. So, like, my friends who were Filipino would always hang out with all the other kids who were Filipino, and all my Chinese friends would always hang out with all the other Chinese kids, and so on and so forth. And there's very little indigenous students going to high school. And and looking at history, there's a number of reasons why. It's like a lot of indigenous kids would drop out in grade 8 or so, and so um, it was tough. And I think I went to about five five different high schools and
Wow.
during those years because I just like encountered a lot of racism. I didn't like a lot of the places, but I ended up graduating from Total Education, which is an alternative school. And when I went there, it was such a breath fresh a breath of fresh air. Am I saying that
Oh,
right?
yeah. All right.
Why doesn't it sound right in my head? Okay. I guess I need some fresh air. Um, but yeah, it was like, I was treated like a human being basically,
Mm.
and encouraged in a number of ways. And I learned a lot. And so I finished grade 12 at an alternative school. And yeah, our education needs alternative programs for students like me who are a little more alienated from the general
Yeah.
education program.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, okay. So now, so at some point you get into university.
Yeah, it's kind of an embarrassing story.
No.
But I mean, I learned from it. And so, I graduated from grade 12 and right away applied to Langara, like to go to college and, thinking, okay, I'm on top of the world. I'm going to go to college. And my first year in college, I did so poorly. And the reason why is because I didn't know how to write a proper essay. And that was the main thing. So, like, I failed a lot of the classes, and the teacher said, well, your essay is not very good. And it's like, it's not really an essay. And I'm like, oh, okay, I got to learn how to write an essay.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, it was embarrassing because I felt like, I just went through school and yet I don't know how to write an essay. I felt stupid, like real, I thought, oh,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, one of my teachers, and she was from the Caribbean. Like, she pulled me aside and she goes, it's like, you can communicate very well. You do well in your oral presentations. You really need to learn how to write a proper essay. That's the only thing holding you back. And she goes like, go learn how to write an essay. Then you come back to college and you'll do a lot better. And I was like, none of the other teachers told me that. She was the one who was kind of supportive, and well, she was a teacher of color. So like, it was, coming from her, it really meant a lot. And you know but I started a family after that, and I went back to college a couple of years later, learning how to write an essay. And so yeah, it's one of it is a weird thing. It's like, you think you finish, you graduate from high school, it's like you're automatically think you can get into college. And
Right.
it's like, no, there's certain standards. And yeah, our school system isn't doing a very good job, especially with Indigenous students.
For sure. Yeah. Well, like talking about that, like I didn't even know the term essay. Like when I was in grade school, we call it composition.
Yeah.
The word essay comes up and like, what is that? It's just the way it is, right?
Yeah, and citations and
Yeah.
MLA style, or all the different styles. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, right. What is that exactly? Now you have now at this point in your life, you have quite a diverse career, correct?
Yeah, I at one point when I was like 15 or so, 16, my dad knew that I wasn't doing well in school. He goes, well, if you're going to drop out of school, you go to work then. You
Mm.
work or go to school. Those are the two options. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna, and I got a job with a landscaping company. And after a summer of hard work, I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And so, like, I'll go back to school. Um, but yeah, ever since I was like 10 or 11, I wanted to work in radio. Like, radio was such a big thing for me, like listening to the radio under my pillow at night, and all of this stuff. And by the time, yeah, at Total Education, they had a course, and basically the course was to run a radio program at Co-op Radio. And so, like, we got our communications 11 and 12 that way. And
Nice.
basically, yeah, we had to learn how to operate, a radio control booth with all the audio. We even had to learn how to turn on the transmitter and hook it up to the transmitter on Mount Seymour. And
Oh, wow.
it was pretty complex. And
Yeah.
but I learned a lot about mixing, like, turntable, like mixing records, and but also tape manipulation. Like, we got interviews, so I had to edit interviews on tape, back in those days. And
Right.
um so I did radio for a number of years at Co-op Radio, and was one of the people who started the Indigenous radio programming back in the 80s with Sadie Warnstaff and Val Dudaward. So the three of us started Indigenous radio programming. So radio was a big part of my life. But by the time I was like 20, after years of doing it, I was like, because that was my childhood dream. Was like I did it. Okay, what next? Now what?
Right.
So I got into journalism for a little while, photography, and then theater school. So all within a few years of each other, and
Right.
yeah, so kind of a diversified background, but I think each one kind of leading to the next, and because I was a really shy teenager. I barely spoke to anyone, and it was kind of painful. And I look back and I'm like, it was pretty sad, I guess. But working in radio got me a little more out.
Mm.
Working in journalism got me out because I had to actually interview people and talk to them. So, and then going to theater school made me extremely out and loud, and um, but each of them helped me along the way, and I'm thankful for each of those job opportunities and experiences. They shaped who I am now.
Very good. Yeah. Now, I know you have a son, right?
I have two sons. Yeah.
You have two sons. Okay. I only know that because one of them, he's now, we're Facebook friends.
Ah, okay.
And I saw his post wishing you a happy birthday too. So that was
Ah,
kind of nice. Now you have something coming up in March.
yeah, March 4th. I got a grant from the BC Arts Council to put on a concert to remember. It's like an anniversary. So in 1989, Warren Arcand, Leonard Fisher, and myself, we put together like a performance piece at the Western Front, and so three young Indigenous men doing video, doing performance art, spoken word, and then music, and blending them all together in a performance. And in that, I brought a turntable into the gallery space and was actually playing some recordings of Chief Dan George over some electronic music that I've done. And
Mhm.
but back in those days, like a lot of the older artists were perplexed and like, but I mean, also thinking, well, what has a turntable got to do with art, or what does a turntable have to do with Indigenous people? And so like they didn't really like that. Like they thought it was kind of like I don't know what they were thinking, but anyway, it's like I kind of got a lot of flack for that. But you know, this year, so in March it'll be 33.3 years. So I'm calling it neo-nativism 33 and a third. You know, making reference to the turntable,
Right.
but also acknowledging neo-nativism as something that we kind of came up with back in those days.
Very good. Yeah, very good. So what date is that?
Um, Sorry,
That's
you cut
okay.
out there. You cut out your question cut out there.
Oh,
What
yeah.
was?
What date is that going to be?
Oh, what date? Sorry. March 4th, and it's going to be at the Vancouver Community College Broadway Campus Auditorium, and it'll be by donation. And I also commissioned Warren Arcan to work with Lisa K. Miller, who's a pianist and composer.
Mhm.
I commissioned Ed Ziu, who's a young Indigenous composer, and she's going to be working with a visual artist named Charlene Johnny.
Right.
So they're going to do video or image and music together.
Mhm.
And I'm working with Stefan Smolovitz on a commission, and we're kind of looking at for this composition, looking at old science fiction movies and using them as a source to create new music. So on top of all of that, we have the Saltchuk City Orchestra, who's going to be performing a number of songs that I've written, um, and they're going to be arranged by John Corsford, who he directs the Hard Rubber Orchestra and a number of other projects. And so it'll be there's be a large ensemble performing at the end, and a lot of the new stuff will be on my next album later this year. So
Wow, sounds
a lot
great.
of new music, a lot of new work, a lot of new people, new collaborations and stuff. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm so thankful that I got the funding for that. And
Yes, that's nice. I'm happy for you too. Yeah, that's really great. Speaking of music, I'm not sure if you're aware that CBC Radio, I think it's on a Friday night, around 10 or so, they have alternative Indigenous music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been listening to it just to, to see what it's like. Right. So it's kind of interesting, really. I'm glad that they're doing that.
No, I'm glad CBC is playing more Indigenous music, and we do need an outlet for hearing stuff. It's like,
yes,
back in the old days, it was just radio, but now it's like everywhere, like internet, iTunes, or YouTube, or
right. Now, one final question. Now, I think I've said this last time I spoke to you. You have a fantastic wit. It is so much fun, the things you post. Now, was anybody else in your family? Does anybody else in your family have that same kind of wit?
We all have a variety of ways of variety of humors.
Mm-hmm.
I think my eldest brother is more into slapstick comedy.
Okay.
But my dad and my mom were very witty in a lot of ways. But I mean, there were, my dad would say something and it would take you a minute to kind of like, oh, that was a joke. Oh, because he had a bit of a deadpan presentation to his jokes. So it was pretty,
yeah, sorry. I love it when anybody makes me laugh. I think it's the best thing ever. I think it's such a healing thing. When I get together with my sisters, I have two of them living close by. And if we're in pain, if we're hurt about anything or whatever, we find ways to laugh and make us feel better for that, short amount of time, right? So I think laughter is a wonderful gift to the world.
Yeah, laughter is medicine.
It is medicine, absolutely.
But it's not covered by the care card, though.
What's wrong with the medical system? Anyway, thanks again, Russell, for doing this with me. Just stay on camera for a second, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank the audience. You've listened to Russell Wallace, and I will be airing this in February, and I will let everybody know when. So you have to watch his interviews because he's a fabulous person. So I don't mean to embarrass you there, Russell. Well, maybe I do. Anyway, take care. Take care, everybody, and peace out.
A sense of community, Chilliwack's a place to be. A sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.